A second whistleblower has come forward related to Donald Trump's conduct toward Ukraine. The lawyer for the first whistleblower confirmed he's representing another. Exit polls point to the Islamist Ennahda party winning Tunisia's legislative elections. However, the newly founded Heart of Tunisia party has also claimed victory. And the historic Moulin Rouge Cabaret celebrates 130 years of kicks and glitz. We take you to the birthday party at this Paris institution. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24. I'm Charlie James. There's now a second whistleblower in the scandal over President Donald Trump's involvement in Ukraine. The lawyer for the first whistleblower now says he is representing another with direct knowledge of the president's actions. This as Democrats intensify the impeachment probe against Trump by subpoenaing the White House. Our Washington correspondent Ketevan Gorgeous-Stani joined the program earlier with what is known about this second whistleblower revelation.
Well, so far we have very little information regarding that second whistleblower because, of course, he is protected by the same laws that the first whistleblower had, which is that we can't know what he does exactly, what his position is, what his identity, his or her identity, actually, because we don't know if it's a man or a woman. And what we know is that that whistleblower has the same legal team as the first whistleblower, and the legal team has given out a few pieces of information. You mentioned the first one, which is that unlike the first whistleblower, this second whistleblower has actual first-hand knowledge of the events that led to here of that phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky. The second information is that he or she does actually work in the intelligence community, and that whistleblower has already spoken to the intelligence community's inspector general. We don't know what the information was that was transmitted to the inspector general, but this is very important, and we've seen the reaction from Donald Trump and from the Republicans, which is exactly the same strategy as the first whistleblower. Degrade that person, saying that this was the continuation of the witch hunt. The Republicans coming out saying that it doesn't matter because any information that comes out is pretty much what we already know, and that this phone call was absolutely perfect, in the words of the president. The president going on a rant, on a Twitter rant since this Saturday, criticizing that second whistleblower. And I'm going to read out one of the president's tweet. He said, "The first so-called second-hand whistleblower got my phone conversation almost completely wrong. They're now on the bench, and they're bringing out another whistleblower who is coming in for the deep state, also with second-hand information," which is apparently not true, but we're seeing reaction, very strong reaction from the Republicans to criticize that second whistleblower.
Next, Hong Kong's face mask ban has failed to stop protesters from wearing them or quell the protesting at all either. Tens of thousands braved the rain on Sunday to march in central Hong Kong, and the demonstrations included confrontations with police, tear gas, and looting. At one point, protesters threw accelerant and a Molotov cocktail into a Bank of China branch. Peter O'Brien shows us the scene.
Commitment to the cause. Hong Kongers in the tens of thousands march in the pouring rain, still wearing face masks despite them being banned. The High Court has rejected a second attempt to block the ban, but that doesn't faze these protesters.
I'm moved by all these students who are speaking out against the government. Now that Carrie Lam has imposed this mask ban with an emergency ordinance, she's walking all over us.
She's targeting the symptoms, not the causes. She's suppressing our right to express ourselves, which will only push us further.
Police fired tear gas and protesters threw petrol bombs amid confrontations that have been a regular occurrence for months now. Demonstrators fear Beijing is eroding the democratic freedoms of the semi-autonomous territory, and unrest reached a new level of violence this week, with police injuring 2 people with live bullets. Many subway stations and shops remained closed on Sunday, and vandalism of places deemed to be pro-Beijing continued. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has vowed to end the violence, saying she won't allow rioters to destroy Hong Kong.
The streets of the Iraqi capital have once again become a graveyard. At least 8 more protesters were killed on Sunday and 17 wounded, according to Iraqi officials. An Interior Ministry spokesman says an investigation is underway to determine the source of the bullets that killed many of the over 100 people dead across the nation. Baghdad has been the center of the anger directed at the government over corruption and a lack of jobs. Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi called on protesters to end their rallies and is offering to meet with them and hear their demands. France's interior minister acknowledging there were, quote, malfunctions in failing to prevent Thursday's deadly stabbing at the Paris police headquarters. Christophe Castanet has come under fire after initially claiming the attacker had never given the slightest reason for alarm. We also now know that the man's wife has been released from custody after being held for questioning. As more details emerge about the killer's profile, the Paris prosecutor says he was likely in contact with members of an ultra-conservative Islamic movement.
The warning signs were too blatant to miss. That's what opposition politicians are saying as they call for the French Interior Minister to resign. Christophe Castaner admits there were faults in failing to prevent the deadly stabbing at Paris police headquarters, but he says he's not going anywhere.
I've looked at his police file, and his clearance for classified work, which he obtained in 2003, had been renewed every time since then. In his administrative records, he was a well-rated employee with good qualities, and no radicalization was detected.
On Thursday, a 45-year-old IT specialist with security clearance killed 3 officers and 1 civilian employee before being shot dead by a trainee officer. Signs of his support for violent extremism have come to light. 4 years ago, he made comments celebrating the attack on satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, in which 12 people were killed. Colleagues flagged this up, but no action was taken. The attacker, who lived here north of Paris, converted to Islam 10 years ago. He had been in contact with an ultra-conservative group and was avoiding certain kinds of contact with women.
Portugal held a general election Sunday in a race to determine which party controls the 230-seat parliament. And Prime Minister Antonio Costa's Socialist Party has claimed a, quote, great victory and says it will seek to form a stable government for the 4 years of the legislature. Exit polls did show the Socialists won, but likely fell just shy of an outright majority. That could mean they'll have to pursue alliances with other left-of-center parties in order to pass legislation. Paris's famed Moulin Rouge Cabaret held a birthday party Sunday, celebrating 130 years of can-can and razzle-dazzle. Though through all of these years, people from around the world have flocked to watch the dancers kick. And for this anniversary, they didn't disappoint. France 24's Clément Bonnereau was there to take it all in.
Of dancers came on stage wearing beautiful costumes as expected. We saw a lot of ostrich feathers, beautiful satin dresses trimmed with pearls and sequins, all the glitz and glamour that have made the Moulin Rouge such an iconic landmark of the French capital. The venue opened its doors 130 years ago to this day on the 6th of October 1889, the same year that the Eiffel Tower was completed. As the years pass, critics say that the shows have somewhat lost touch with modern times. Some also say that they objectify women and that the Moulin Rouge must find ways to reinvent itself in the Me Too era. But the fact that some 600,000 people come to see the shows every year and that thousands of tourists and Parisians have come to celebrate the anniversary tonight shows know one thing, and it's that the spirit of cabaret lives on. The magic of the Moulin Rouge is still very much alive.
And finally, we turn to Sunday's legislative elections in Tunisia. Exit polls conducted by independent polling analysts indicate that the moderate Islamist Ennahda party won the most votes, taking in 17.5%. Its main rival, the Heart of Tunisia party, was tipped as second. It is headed by detained media mogul Nabil Karoui and polled at 15.6%. However, both parties have claimed victory. Whichever one wins, it will face the same obstacles as its predecessors: high unemployment, inflation, and public debt. For more on this story, let's go now to France 24's Armin Georgian, who is in Tunis. Armin, can you break down these exit polls a little bit for us?
Well, this is an analysis done by an independent polling company, and it was actually pretty accurate in the first round of the presidential election last month. So what this company is saying is that, according to their analysis, Ennahda is likely to end up with about 40 seats in the next parliament, and the Heart of Tunisia party is likely to end up with 33 to 35 seats. So if that's confirmed in the next few days, then there's clearly not much between these two parties, but neither of them on paper then are really on course to get a majority on their own. They would have to build a coalition bloc, and that's the tricky part of the Tunisian political system, is that it's very hard for one party to get an overall majority, so they get into a lot of messy coalition negotiations, and that's probably what's going to be happening over the next few weeks. If you look again at the next few parties, how they're placed according to this independent polling analysis, there's no clear tendency really, because you've got a mix of liberal parties and Islamist or conservative parties that are within the top five. So it's not really clear to me at this stage how a bloc is formed. So it's probably going to be quite a complex process going forward.
Let's talk about turnout. Officials put the turnout today at just over 41%. How does that line up with expectations?
Well, it's actually it's exceeded my expectations based on what I saw at one of Tunis's biggest polling stations earlier today, and it also exceeds my expectations in relation to what I've heard from Tunisians here in the capital over the last 2 days. I mean, the first day I was here, I had a lot of trouble finding anyone who said that they were going to vote in this parliamentary election, and yet here we have a 41.3% turnout. That's not as catastrophic as some people had expected, but it is much lower than the parliamentary election turnout of 2014. In that result, we had a 68% turnout, so clearly much further down. The Election Commission is still giving its press conference here, and the president of that commission said a little earlier that this result, the turnout, was disheartening. So it does reflect the disillusionment with the political system, with the political parties, and a lot of frustration that I've heard on the streets of the capital about the infighting, the deadlock within Parliament, and the inability of this outgoing Parliament to actually solve the country's problems, poverty and unemployment being top of that list of grievances. And a lot of people said we don't expect anything from the next Parliament, so that really has a lot to do with this low turnout.
France 24's Armin Georgian in Tunis reporting on Sunday's legislative elections. Thanks so much for that update. And that's all for this edition, but do stay with us here on France 24. More news and information coming up next.
France 24, 4 news channels in 4 languages, 430 journalists, 35 nationalities, 160 bureaus around the world. A global reach. 385 million households in over 180 countries can watch France 24. 80 million viewers watch the channel every week, and the numbers are constantly growing, with audience multiplied by 2 in 5 years. France 24 Online is also forging ahead. Over 15.5 million visits a month on France24.com. With 59.8 million videos viewed online, France 24 is a leader on YouTube, while our 38.2 million Facebook and Twitter followers make us France's #1 channel on social media. To our constantly growing community of viewers, thank you.
Welcome to Across Africa, our weekly roundup of stories from across the continent. I'm Georgia Calvin-Smith, and coming up, the years of instability that's followed Cameroon's Anglophone crisis has cost civilians dearly. We meet some of the victims trying to overcome the trauma that they've suffered by being caught in the middle of an armed struggle between separatists and soldiers. Also, Nairobi launches a desperate blood drive ahead of a looming crisis that's likely to follow the end of US funding of Kenya's National Blood Bank. The country's race to beef up supplies on its own comes amidst an ongoing shortage. And US activist and actress Mia Farrow is raising awareness about the avoidable and heartbreaking cost of hunger and malnutrition. She stopped into the studio on her way to her latest mission in Chad for the International Rescue Committee. But first, as well as the thousands killed during Cameroon's Anglophone crisis, the fighting has forced around 500,000 people from their homes. Since the tensions first erupted at the end of 2016, many have also witnessed extreme acts of violence. Our correspondents have headed to one organisation in Yaoundé that's trying to help victims overcome the physical and emotional trauma caused by the conflict.
He still has scars on his body 1 year after he was attacked and fires set on his body by armed men in the southwest region of Cameroon. Kingsley says he was kidnapped, tortured and fuel poured on him by those he says are separatist fighters.
One of them said, "Give me that petrol." Take the petrol, they sprayed my skin. They light it.
The armed men went on to burn his house, killing his 7-month-old pregnant wife.
I have 2 kids and a wife who was pregnant, 7 months. She was sleeping. She's dead. She burned in the house. If I think of my wife, I think of revenge.
Since then, he has been living with this trauma like other thousands of displaced Anglophones who have taken refuge in the capital, Yaoundé. Most displaced people come to the headquarters of this association to seek solutions. One of the only associations which offers psychological support to nearly 2,000 victims of the Anglophone crisis.
What is causing your heart to be painful, Mr. Kingsley?
She was pregnant.
Pregnant wife? That's you lost 2 people.
Yes.
Your wife?
Victims here talk about their worries to minimize the grief they feel. A psychosocial counselor talks to Kingsley as he tries to determine the degree of trauma he has suffered.
If you want to really move ahead, you must leave that past and look in front as you are looking at me.
Like Kingsley, thousands of English-speaking displaced people suffer from psychological disorders. The gravity of their trauma is not completely taken into account by local relief organizations.
They are focused just on giving food to internally displaced persons, maybe giving them clothing, providing them shelter. It is not enough. If we don't target this neglected aspect, we are moving on a blind road.
According to NGOs, thousands of victims of crime, rape and kidnappings need psychological assistance to deal with the atrocities of the underrated 3-year-old Anglophone crisis.
Before the US pulled funding from Kenya's National Blood Bank this October, Nairobi ramped up blood drives. The country's already facing a national shortage, and although it's racing to beef up blood supplies on its own, the end of foreign aid will mean it'll be even tougher to keep up crucial emergency services. Our correspondents report.
Nairobi's largest public hospital is running low on blood. Hospital management frequently calls for emergency donors, typically the families of patients.
I have come here to donate blood because my wife is pregnant and that's why I'm here. And I don't come here often, unless I'm required to come.
About 60% of the blood supply is transfused to mothers and children, often after complications during childbirth. Donors are rare here, and every 10 minutes, approximately 7 people are at risk of death if they don't receive blood.
Most Kenyans don't have the knowledge about blood donation. So in Kenya, most of the time we'll find maybe when we have a disaster or something like that. Otherwise, when they are just told to come and donate, nobody turns up.
In the last 15 years, the U.S. has given more than 6 billion euros to the Kenyan Blood Bank program. Without this, it would have been impossible to collect and analyze blood. Off camera, employees admitted they're scared about the loss of funds, but management struck a reassuring tone.
If you're getting support, that's taxpayers' money from another country. And at some point, you know, we just have to support ourselves as a country.
The government hasn't yet announced a plan to fill the deficit. The Minister of Health is using his platform to organize large-scale donation drives, setting a goal to get closer to the 1 million units of blood the country needs. The day of the drive, the largest donor in Kenya was on hand to help publicize the effort.
We give them awareness, and when you say you fear the needles, if you are a relative or yourself you need blood, where will the blood come? You have to be,
To guarantee adequate stock, about 2% of the population has to donate each year. But with U.S. aid coming to an end, it's impossible to know if and how Kenya's blood bank will continue to operate.
US activist and actress Mia Farrow stopped into the Eye on Africa studio on her way to Chad, where she's helping on an international rescue committee mission to tackle the levels of hunger in the country. It has one of the highest in the world. Now, she's long been a UNICEF ambassador and has also helped raise awareness about the devastating malnutrition caused by South Sudan's civil war. She told us about one heartbreaking loss she witnessed firsthand.
This was the only one in South Sudan that was a comprehensive clinic for people. Miriam had walked for 5 days, she told me, to reach the clinic with her baby, who was very fragile and was a particularly beautiful baby, who was just staring at her mother, a little girl. And while Miriam was talking to me, the baby stopped panting and died in her arms. Now, to ask a mother to walk for 5 days to reach the clinic to address the malnutrition, in a war-torn place, in that kind of weather. They're not roads, they're not sidewalks, there's nobody. It was just this woman who was herself very fragile. So the IRC is leading a mission to address bringing the nutrition, the life-saving nutrients to the communities rather than having the parent bring the child these distances. And it's really working. So I'm excited to see what's happening in Chad because it's a country I care very much about.
Well, the biggest mosque in West Africa has officially been unveiled in Dakar. It's called Massalikul Jinan, which means the paths to paradise. Religious and political leaders from across the country attended the inauguration, as did our correspondents who sent us this report.
An area the size of 3 football fields in the heart of the capital that can welcome up to 45,000 worshippers. The mammoth Massalikul Jinan Mosque is the biggest in West Africa. For 7 years, some 800 builders worked on the mosque, a project the lead engineer says was particularly complex. Inde Mariam's moved to see the monumental project come to an end.
It's incredibly satisfying and an honor to have made this dream come true. When we'd finished the big construction work, the structure, we'd asked ourselves, when's the inauguration? Because it was such a complex project, a specific structure. To reach this point, now is a blessing.
Outside, volunteers have their hands full. They're followers of Senegal's Muslim Murid Brotherhood, the community behind the mosque.
We're taking care of a little bit of everything, making sure there's water. We follow the orders of our religious leader. We're very happy and we thank Serigne Touba, the founder of the Murid Brotherhood. May the Lord reward him 100-fold.
Built on a plot of land which was gifted by the government, the mosque cost 30 million euros to build. money not well spent, according to critics. But the entire budget for the mosque was raised by the Murid Brotherhood, says one of its representatives.
Associations of worshippers collected donations, and with the result of these donations, we were able to build this mosque. People say it's a waste, but it's not. We need to first look at what this means on a symbolic level.
In the future, the mosque will also hold an Islamic learning centre and a museum.
Sudan's kicked off a new era in football with its first ever female-only club. Two teams clashed at the start of their own women's championship in Khartoum. The tournament would have seemed unlikely just as recently as the start of the year. But since the ousting of former leader Omar al-Bashir and the creation of a joint civilian-military ruling body, women's rights have become much more of a priority, including on the pitch. Emerald Maxwell has more.
In scenes that were not long ago unimaginable in Khartoum, these players kicked off Sudan's first ever women's club football league.
This is a great historic day for Sudan. It's the result of a very big effort that didn't start yesterday.
The crowd cheered and chanted civilian rule as the teams of Tahadi and Difa inaugurated the 21-club championship. For these women growing up under strict Sharia law, playing football in their homeland was virtually impossible. But all that changed when longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir was toppled in April, following nationwide protests.
This was my first time playing at the stadium in Khartoum. It was really great and special.
If it hadn't been for the Sudanese revolution, my goal was to perhaps play for a country other than Sudan. But now I don't have to. It's better to play for your own country.
The start of the Female Football League comes amid expectations that the current 3-year transition period will lead to the promotion of women's rights, sports and arts. Following this first club clash in the capital, matches are scheduled in other parts of the country in the coming days.
Well, that's it for Across Africa. Thanks very much for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.
Africa News, your eyes on Africa. Bringing you the latest from across the continent.
Eye on Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith on France 24 and France24.com.